Serious former gang members of Reddit, what was it like being in a gang? How were you initiated? And what kind of things did you see and do? I tell people I know today that I was a completely different person when I was younger. Sometimes even I can't believe that I was ever involved in gang life. Keep in mind this was well over a decade ago. I was in a mixed race gang, however the majority were Hispanic. It started as a group of friends needing protection from other gangs, but progressed into just plain old criminal behavior. It was exciting to run from cops, cause trouble and occasionally dodge bullets, but really to a bunch of poor and poorly educated kids. To be part of something bigger than ourselves with a feeling of family, it felt good. Getting in was getting ranked in by getting your ass kicked for 30 seconds by whoever was already in the gang and wanted to participate the time, which was usually between 5 to 10 members vs 1. Most days were spent getting high, cruising lowriders around looking for heinous, or slanging dope, or looking to hit a lick, or starting shit with rivals, but mostly just chilling. A life of crime though has consequence, so rap sheets got long and jail was just another place to go. It was also a dangerous life though, lots of injuries and too many deaths of some of my closest friends. But after my best friend was murdered and my son was born, I made a change. I didn't find Jesus or any religion. I found logic and reason, moved far away from all the bullshit. I still keep in contact with one or two of my old homeboys, but most of them are dead, in jail, or strung out. Gang life is bullshit, but when you're poor and defenseless, sometimes it's just the way it is. I joined a gang when I was 14. We were considered shorties to the actual big bad gang in East Chicago, with a chance to be jumped in and marked a tattoo on your right calf at 16. Basically we were a bunch of wannabes. There were a couple big shit older kids who were our mentors, my big brother among them, but for the most part it was a bunch of 12, 13, and 14 years olds playing at badasses. But it gave me what I needed during that time: camaraderie. My family had just moved out of the projects of Gary, Indiana, as a half-white/half Puerto Rican who looked all white. That was not fun at all, and to a little neighborhood right outside of Gary. I had no friends. We were still incredibly poor, and to top it off, my father had just been diagnosed with lung cancer. My other major male role model, my grandfather, was confined to a chair in our living room, slowly dying of depression and a rising number of strokes. Life sucked. The gang changed that, for a little while. I had friends again. After 2.5 years of every peer around me treating me with contempt because of the color of my skin. Even the one kid I considered a friend treated me like shit when other people were around. Having friends, being part of a group, I'd have done any amount of shitty gang banging for that feeling. It didn't matter that I had very little in common with any of these people besides the fact that we were all poor. We did some bad things, broke into a few houses, and beat the living hell out of one poor bastard for betraying our trust, and that summer ended with me doing a 2-month-long stint in the Lake County Juvenile Center, which made living in the projects seem like a wet dream. But for the most part we just hung out together, and acted like kids who were trying to act like they were too mature to act like kids. We'd smoke cigarettes thanks to a 19-year-old member of the gang who was my best friend at the time, but looking back, he was a complete and utter loser. Talk about banging chicks. Talk about kicking the asses of rival gang members or the asshole jocks at school. Talk about how badass we'd be when we got to join the real gang in a couple years. In hindsight, I realize we were all just ghetto nerds who had banded together for the sake of banding together. It was a brotherhood that I didn't know I desperately needed until I had it. They were there at my father's funeral. They were there at my grandfather's funeral. They were there, basically. I come from the hood. My mom was in a gang back in the 60s, and that's where she met my dad. They were in the Swartzmakers. Apparently that had to do with death. I never asked them if they murdered anyone, but I hope not. Anyways, I grew up hoping to join a gang. I was young and stupid. I joined the Crackerpackers, mainly because my friends did. The classic monkey see monkey do scenario. I've been jailed 3 times for battery and was too afraid to quit for 4 years. Finally quit the Crackerpackers last year. Feels liberating. Vancouver Gang War. I was in one of the groups during the period linked above. I was initiated by basically going to work for them. Our little subgroup was run by a Vietnamese dude. Most guys made money from growing weed, smuggling weed, running phones delivery line for crack, heroin and powdered coke. Usually these workers would sell weed on their own at the same time. I had grow houses, worked a phone for a while. I also used to find people who were social butterflies and get them to sell stuff for me. Like if somebody had a little weed dealing business, I'd force them to buy wholesale off me. If they weren't affiliated with anybody, I'd also try to get them selling blow and E, since their customer base usually wanted those, cheaper and better quality than they were paying usually, so often I didn't need to threaten them. It was an interesting time in my life. Sometimes if a guy would get into a fight at a club, I'd get a call at like 1 AM to go get his back, and we'd have like 100 guys show up to put the boots to a group of maybe 10 guys who were starting shit. For a young guy it was honestly awe-inspiring. You get into a fight with some cocky douchebags at a club, and with a couple phone calls you have a bunch of dudes arriving in luxury cars to get your back. Most of the guys in those days came from nice middle class homes, so when the cops really started cracking down hard on gang activity, lots of guys just got jobs or moved out to the Vancouver area to grow weed. I work in the legal end of the commercial medical cannabis industry now, so luckily some of my skills transferred over. Lots of guys ended up in the oil patch. For some reason many became car salesmen. I was 80 East Side Skyline Peru, one of the original sets that made up the Bloods. I joined up when I was 13. Got jumped in by 5 for 30 seconds, then given my flag. I did the usual gangbanged, jumped people, robbed people, shot people, fucked hoes, sold dope. Became somewhat known because I was Middle Eastern and not black, so people took notice. At first it was cool, but then I noticed I caught the wrong people's attention for the wrong reasons. I was active up until I was 21, almost at YOG status. I stopped because I moved every few years and everywhere I went I noticed Bloods and Crips, and every city had different knowledge gang history you're taught prior to initiation. For instance, on the West Coast it's more of a block thing, everyone knows the big homie, so if you claim you're part of a set and people approach that set's big homie and he don't know you, that's your ass. On the East Coast it's UBN, United Blood Nation, and it's ran like the mob rather than Nogs, Yogig and BG. They have bosses and cappers. UBN knowledge starts with how the Millers made a Nick connection, and the 9-tree set was started in the 90s, completely different from what I was told. When I went to the South I seen that the Crips had gangster disciple knowledge and Bloods had vice lord knowledge, and most of their sets were non-existent in the West Coast. The gang shit is hella flimsy. I left that life alone, and I have a family now and own my own businesses. But sometimes these young bitch made motherfuckers step up, and I have to let them know who the fuck they are talking to. When I was living in Chicago I ran with some Latin kings. I wasn't gang banging, but ended up dating someone who did, and hung around with his group of friends. It was crazy. I watched him sell crack to the people in his own neighborhood. The cops not only knew them by name and alias, but when we all got caught trespassing at an elementary school at 11 PM, one of the cops asked how one of the queens had been doing since she had calmed down. Our nights consisted of walking the neighborhoods for hours trying to find something to do, like throwing up the crown at passing cars to see if they were a rival gang or not. So many of the girls were extremely young, like 15 to 20, and had already had a kid or two by a king that's at least 5 years her senior. The kings have a certain date in January where all the local chapters meet up in the park and have a picnic. There's a salute that involves putting your right hand over your heart and reciting something out of a Bible, all whilst facing the sun. It was blood in, blood out. To get initiated, the males or females have to get beaten on for about 30 seconds by 5 to 10 members. They had weekly meetings, and if someone didn't attend them, it would be considered a violation, and they would have to stand against a wall and let the other members beat them up for 15 seconds. For women, they could be beaten or they could fuck the entire gang. The women who chose the latter would lose all respect of the gang, and to humiliate them, the kings would turn them away. Getting out of the gang for girls was easy if they became pregnant. Not even the most ruthless of the kings wanted a pregnant queen gang banging on Brian Ma. What got me is how they preach about loyalty, but everyone is trying to fuck everyone else's man or woman. At the end I couldn't deal with the fear that my house would get raided and I'd go to jail for possession of crack cocaine. I never knew if who I was with was carrying a gun or drugs, which they always were. Not knowing if my boyfriend we going to come home in one piece or not was too much, and I called it quits. I'm still really good friends with one of the queens. They can be genuinely amazing people that just get caught up in a crazy situation. They took me in and treated me like family when they barely knew me, but that's really all the good I have to share. I wasn't a banger, but I did do some drug muling for an older Italian fraternal organization. I watched someone that I looked at like a father put a gun to a cop's head and pull the trigger twice. I got out after watching a cop executed from about 25 feet away. I was a fall guy because I was still a minor, so was never initiated. I still have nightmares about it sometimes, and it's been close to 15 years. There was only one upside. I got off the hard drugs I was on that day cold turkey. I was born into a club with my dad slash father slash sperm donor being a charter member. I'm his son, so technically I'm a member. My dad was, as I was growing up, semi-inactive, or so he said. He was a scout leader, football coach, hockey supporter, and all about great father. He made sure my head was in a place it wasn't. I went to prep schools my whole life, then to one of the best colleges the US has to offer in engineering. It was all paid for by him. Then finally after messing it all up on my own joined his trade, legit skilled trade. I've had a great life. His life wasn't like mine, and he made sure to never let me follow his path. I'm technically a member of an MC, so that is my badder story. I loved it at the time and now get pretty down whenever I look at my flash. For the most part pretty normal stuff. Smoked a haystack, what we didn't sell. Drank Allet, one of our cash cows was home distilled spirits, and as the head of security, including legit security gigs we got, lots of posturing, and pretty regular brawls. Please note I'm from a country where gun crime isn't so prolific. I did have a couple of friends from outside the club get beat or stabbed to death in relation to the lifestyle, but as far as I know everyone who has ever been a member is still alive. In terms of initiation there wasn't really one, but I made it clear that anyone who didn't want me around could take it up with me, although I did a fair bit of menial dirt for a long time. I grew up close to Chicago, and through high school I would visit it frequently, and built up a network of friends through music. Shortly into hanging out, I was jumped in by 4 guys, and earned respect quickly through being very competent, and having good ideas. I never really like to talk about my role or my tasks, until I'm older. However, I have had guns in my face, and watched friends die in front of me. Through it I started drinking, smoking weed every day and chain smoking cigarettes, just so I would have something to focus on. I got to the point where I couldn't be alone for more than a minute without remembering getting shot at and chased. In school, I was picked on a lot, but it made me feel tough and respected even though it was my secret, until I started cutting ties and focusing on an actual career. I hated the life and that was how everyone else felt around me.